Hello, Nicholas. Welcome to the Chalke Valley Festival.
Well, thank you very much.
Although I gather that you've been here many times before, and we're very pleased to have you back. First of all, could you tell me how you like the festival, and also whether you think festivals like this are very important? History festivals, are they very important?
I think the Chalke Valley History Festival is amazing. I think it's pretty much unique. I don't know of a bigger one in the UK. There's a huge variety of stuff here. I don't know whether it's in the shot, but we're surrounded by sort of vehicles of all ages and people sort of demonstrating things. I think it really brings things to life for people. And then there are some fairly serious talks as well, and a huge mixture of events going on. And I think that really does sort of show the richness of, what's available if you're interested in history to study and get involved in, and different ways that you can engage with the past. So yeah, I think it's an absolutely terrific festival.
Absolutely fantastic, thank you. So you are interested in legislative history. Now there might be some misconception that some people have that perhaps it's a little bit boring. Could you tell me how you kind of got interested in this area of history?
Yeah, so what I'm interested in is how do you get people to agree on language? So it's all very well to say, the American Constitution's written by 60-odd people over the course of 3 months, but what were they doing for all of that time, and how did they develop a process where they could come to agreement even though they started from essentially opposite ends of irreconcilable positions? And the same is true, how does Parliament come to agree on particular language? How do we end up with the sort of words on paper that are going to then be interpreted by courts or interpreted by officials? So I'm just very interested in that process of negotiation of sort of foundational text. And I got interested in it because I really felt, people were studying all kinds of other things to do with the history of the law. But the history of, how did you actually write a constitution? If you sat down to write a constitution, that process was something that people were just much less interested in, and I thought it was something that we should probably think about more. It's not a problem that's gone away, of course. We've spent the last 20 years trying to build states around the world, trying to write constitutions, and I think understanding a bit more about how those processes work when they work and why they don't work when they don't work is really important.
That's really fascinating, appreciating how kind of legislation and communication all works together to form these texts. So you are here today talking about Roe versus Wade. You're also here tomorrow talking about civil rights.
Yes.
On Roe versus Wade, do you think that because we've had this big moment where everyone in the world has suddenly had their attention drawn to the judicial system and how much power in particular in the US they have, do you think that this is kind of like a changing point in legislative history in terms of how much attention it gets, how important people think it is?
I think the Supreme Court has often changed its mind about quite fundamental things. But I think there was a long period, especially in this country, when it looked as if the Supreme Court was always on broadly the liberal side of the argument, whatever argument it was, free speech, freedom of the press, something like that. And they'd really sort of pushed the envelope in one direction and done an awful lot of good. There was always the potential that a different Supreme Court would have a different view of how to interpret constitutional texts and a different view of their role. And that's what we now see. And I think, there's no need to catastrophize about it, but I think it shows that actually things don't always pull in the same direction. And I think people in this country who used to look at America and think, well, we must have a written constitution so that our courts can do the things that the Supreme Court is doing, might now look at the current US Supreme Court and say, well, maybe not that then. Yeah.
And then, I know this is quite a difficult question to make brief, but could you just tell us a bit about how influential the Supreme Court and the US judicial system are, how influential they are in shaping the history of the USA?
Yeah, so the US Supreme Court gets to decide what is and isn't allowed as a law. They actually get to do quite a bit of reshaping of laws even after they've been written by making actually quite detailed decisions about how they will and won't be applied. And they have an incredible amount of freedom to do all of that. They have an incredible amount of freedom to decide which cases they're going to take and which they're not. They broadly write their own rules for how they're going to make decisions. So, some people use the phrase judicial sovereignty to describe the American system, and really to capture the idea that the bit of the American state that has the final say on many, many questions is actually the US Supreme Court, which might have come as a bit of a surprise to at least some of the people who wrote the US Constitution, who probably didn't anticipate it having quite the role it now does.
That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, thank you so much.
Really looking forward to your talk later and your talk tomorrow morning as well.
Thank you so much.